Hello, my name is the Jordan Coach of the Virginia Valley Vault. Welcome to the Draftables, a series in which I go way too deep into analyzing VGC Draft League, trying to help y'all get better at the game. Unless you're new to the Draftables, you know that there's usually one Mon on the cover page, but Draftables episodes are about more than one Mon. They're about groups of Mons, archetypes, roles they play, helping y'all group things into your mind for when you're drafting, when you're team building, and when you're playing. But this week is a little different. I'm going to be analyzing lots of different steel types. It's about the steel typing, the roles it plays. I intend to argue that steel types are more unified in their role that they tend to play on a draft league squad. I'll also tend to argue that they're one of the best, if not the best, type to make sure you have on your draft league squad. And since there aren't that many good ones, we're going to want to do analysis of lots of the good ones and some of the more iffy ones. If you like this kind of analytical content, please leave a like below, like the YouTube stuff. Let's go right in. So what steel types do? With water types, there are so dang many water types. They're like, some are offensive, some are defensive, some are frail, some are bulky. It's not very easy to tell you what a water type does, but with steel types, they generally have a common purpose. And just looking at their stat spreads, this is all fully evolved steel types, you start to see a common trend here. They are very physically defensive. Like the average stats of fully evolved Mons are like 80 in the 80s somewhere. So steel types are average way tankier than the average Mon. They are also generally physical attackers, and they're generally slow. So they're generally good on all the defense, in particular physical defense. Usually they're physically strong, but not as strong as they are defensive, and they're slow. So their job is to slow the game down, right? They're not going to win the game in 2 turns, but you can't push through steel types in 1 or 2 turns either. So you probably know that they resist 10 types, and that's completely ridiculous. And they were brought in Generation 2 to try to balance some of the more strong offensive typings. But their job is to live hits, switch into hits, because they have so many resistances, and slow the pace of the game down. They also have some other common roles, which is because the game is slower, you can set up with steals more easily. With Iron Defense or other moves, you can enable other setup because you're slowing the game down in general. You can make another type better, right? Every Mon gets better. With few exceptions, every Mon gets better when you add a steel typing onto it. So you might struggle to make a good bug type work, but a bug steel type is super good. When needed, they can scrap. Usually they have pretty good physical attack power. But typically, like, the Game Freak understands what they were doing when they added the steel type and giving it 10 weaknesses. They knew in the beginning that if you're going to have a steel type on something, it's got to have like clear weak points, otherwise this thing's going to be busted. But every once in a while, Game Freak adds a great Pokemon, gives it the steel type, and just forgets that they're supposed to not be very good if they're going to be steel type. And so over time, we've gradually added more and more bonkers Pokemon because they're good and they're steel type. Like, this is how steel type started out, right? It was just like a half dozen Pokemon, really bad moves, and generally Mons with clear weaknesses in here. But in general, they add 1 or 2 a generation, and now we're at, by my count, 10 bonkers steel types. And 10 is not 16. Most draft leagues have 16 coaches, and so that means that you are not going to be able to get one of these steel types. You are not going to be able to get a fantastic steel type, but there are some pretty good ones. It starts to slide kind of quickly after this, but there are some very good ones, and I'm going to be analyzing a couple of them one by one, and then there are a few iffy ones where you're going to have to work for them as much as they work for you, but that doesn't mean that you can't take advantage of their amazing steel typing. One example of how much a steel type does, a good steel type does for a draft league, this is my VBL Season 3 draft league. This squad had some issues. It wasn't as explosive as I would have liked, but it had a number of things going for it, and one of those was typing balance. Like, no net weaknesses to any type was pretty good, in my opinion. But you realize like how much weight Bronzong is carrying for this team. Like without Bronzong, you just remove Bronzong, and all of a sudden, I do not have net resistances to Rock and Ice. I'm neutral to Rock and Ice. All of a sudden, I'm weak to flying and ground, because the levitating Bronzong was protecting some of my ground weaknesses, and the steel typing was helping some of my flying weaknesses, especially the Rillaboom. So Bronzong was why this team had great typing balance. Without it, this team is merely pretty good in typing balance. Having a net fairy resistance very hard because very few types actually resist fairy, and so Bronzong definitely helped with that as well. And so we're starting to understand like some of the core things they do is that there are some key types that are just hard to resist in general, and I'm going to call out 3 of them in particular. I'm doing some of the spreadsheeting, so y'all don't have to, but some of the best mons, I've got a full tier list, which we'll get to at the end, but some of the best mons are generally near the top. But it's very important that among their 10 resistances that your steel type, if it's going to do a steel type's job, it should probably resist ice or rock or fairy. Just these are very strong offensive typing that have few resistances. And that's, in a word, why Heatran is top tier, in my opinion. Top tier as a Pokemon, top tier as a steel type, is because it has immense switch-in value. No Mon switches into ice types better than Heatran. No Mon switches into fairy types better than Heatran. I don't know if there's a single other Mon that doubly resists fairy. I guess Salazzle, fire, poison. But anyway, in general, the Mons near the top are good at being steel types because they resist these really hard to resist types. Like if you don't look at the type chart as you're drafting, you're gonna end up with an ice weakness. You're gonna end up with a rock weakness. Oddly enough, I consider Celesteela top tier not because it resists ice and rock, but because it's bonkers, has great move pool, great stats, etc. And the flying typing also negates some of Steel's weaknesses, fighting and ground, turns that from weakness straight into an immunity. So Celesteela's got a lot going for it, but I think part of what makes Heatran and Metagross so good is that they are steel type, and they resist the things that you want them to resist. Let's keep going. Let's jump right in to one excellent steel type. I think it's on its way to being recognized in Draft League as a very, very strong steel type. With the removal of Dynamax from most Draft Leagues, I think this mon's about to get better. This is a defensive steel type. Like you see the top stats, Corviknight, very, very good. And when you consider that it has both high defensive stats and high HP, then all of a sudden it's like very, very bulky. So no one stat is huge, but together they're quite good. So this is strong, bulkier on the physical side than 90% of fully evolved Pokemon. Very, very good. And then on the special side, 69% of Pokemon, fully evolved Pokemon are not quite as bulky on the special side as Corviknight. And beyond where you start, which is pretty good, Corviknight has fantastic boosting moves. Iron Defense, make it a physical wall. Bulk Up, make it a physical wall while also buffing its offense, so a little more well-rounded there. But you have the best complement to boosting your defense, which is Body Press, the move that uses your physical defense as offense. So Corviknight's one of the best users of Body Press out there. I mean, I guess if you were Como and you have the fighting type, that's even better, but this is a very good mon. It's slowing the game down, of becoming unkillable, and then turning that into offense with Body Press. It has a very strong stab move. We saw it with Galarian Zapdos, Brave Bird, very, very good. It's not really like a fantastic fit for Brave Bird, right? It's not like it's taking an Oko, even with a high base power move, and its health is very valuable, right? It's hard to get rid of its health, so a move that gives a recoil damage is not great, but at least it has Roost, right? Reliable recovery is very, very good for a mon that's hard to take out in the first place. If they're doing 20% of the time, they are not able to beat a Corviknight with Roost, just that period. So there's good the classic steel type moves. Iron Head is good if you can go first, and so Corviknight is yet another slow steel type, but it does have access to Tailwind. That's the most remarkable thing about Corviknight. It might be the only steel type with Tailwind. Don't call me on that though. So once it goes first, then it starts iron heading, and then since it's going first, it's getting that flinch chance, and then you're just really grinding the game down at that point. But we've got our good stab moves, we've got our honorary stab move and Body Press, and then just like a couple other moves. Corviknight, like I've never drafted before because I thought it's like a little like boring, as in it's mostly going to run the same stuff, the top of both of these columns all the time, but you don't need every Mon to be able to run 20 moves. Not every Mon can be a Latias or something, or a Lowland Persian. Some Mons need to do their job really well, and Corviknight does its job really well. So I think this is a really, really good Pokemon, particularly without Dynamax, games get to be slower. You get to actually meet an equilibrium. A lot of Dynamax games, you'll probably use your Dynamax to break through the Corviknight, and you don't have that option anymore. Finally, I should talk about Corviknight having an excellent ability. It's like Defiant Plus. I don't necessarily understand it perfectly, but if they attempt to put Snap Drops on you, it reverses back onto them. So an Intimidate would instead be a drop to their attack rather than a drop to Corviknight's attack. A Snarl would be instead reflected back. And so it's surprisingly limiting. It's like Defiant in that way. It's a very good ability. But this is a Mon that, on a scale of 1 to 20, I'm pretty comfortable taking at a 13, I think. I don't think it requires that much support either to be effective. It supports your team rather than the other way around. So very good Steel type. Recommend Corviknight. Next, here's another good Steel type. You don't always have to think of Steel types as, I'm gonna brawl, I'm gonna take some hits and then deal more damage back. Klefki, I think, is a very good Steel type in unusual ways, in that it slows the game down, but what does it do at that time? It screws with you. It screws with the opponent, and it uses its weird but pretty big Prankster move pool. Prankster screens are pretty rare. The ability to always go first and cut the damage coming into you. Having access to both screens with Prankster means a lot of Mons targeting an OHKO can no longer get one with screens. With Metal Sound, you're doubling your output. Very, very good to be able to do that first. Speed Control, very, very good when it's first. Other forms of screwing around with messing items, setting weather. These are very, very good moves when they're Prankster. And so there are some things that I would have loved Klefki to have. It's got a weird Prankster move pool. It doesn't have Tailwind. It doesn't have Scary Face. It doesn't have Fake Out. It doesn't have some of those amazing things that make Whimsicott and Grimmsnarl the top Pranksters. But it's also the Prankster Steel type. This is already one of the bulkiest Prankster Mons in general. The compensation for being Prankster and being broken is you need to be frail. But this Mon is decently fine. 30 bulkier than 30 to 40% of fully evolved Mons, but also if you know that you always can get the screens, not every Prankster has screens, it becomes very bulky. So if you're staring down a strong special fire type like a Charizard, you can light screen in order to live. Maybe not Charizard and Sun, maybe that's a bad example, but the point is, if you see the strong special attacker, you can live it with light screen. If you see the strong physical attacker, you live it with reflect. So the Mon is very bulky when you consider it has probably the best typing in the entire game, Steel Fairy. So the stats look unassuming, but they're quite good when you take into account Steel typing and Fairy typing, the best two types in the game. The attacking move pool is also weird, and some things you would wish you would have, it doesn't have. Doesn't have Moonblast, but it's just enough. And when you consider that it can make itself an offensive threat with one of the best boosting moves, Calm Mind, then it really can be offensive. And I think that's an important part of its skill set, is that 3 out of 4 times you can just make it a Prankster bot, screw around, make the game difficult for the opponent, but sometimes you can do solid damage. It can be your Steel type offensively, especially with some setup, but it's a very good defensive Steel type in some unusual ways, not because it's tanking the hits head on, but because with screens it can. So this is a Mon that I would comfortably play 11 on a scale of 1 to 24, maybe 12. If you can really take advantage of the Prankster weather, that's very, very important. If you are a Mon if you have some strong physical attackers that don't really like to get burned, Misty Terrain and Safeguard can really help with that. So it's just you're going to want to find the synergies for Klefki. That's not saying that you need to help Klefki. It's just that it gets better and better the more you find that pairs with it. So this has the Jordan seal of approval for quality Fairy type. Not a top 10, but definitely one of the ones that it should be drafted, I think, most of the time, unless it's super overpriced or something. Yeah, so some of the limitations of Steel types as an offensive type is its move pool. It's good against Fairy types, and that's the most important, one of the best types, but the other things it's strong against are Rock and Ice. those mons have their own issues in general if they're rock or ice type. So you don't really, like, steel coverage is decent sometimes, but steel type attacking not that great. And they don't have what I call the gold standard: 90 base power, never misses, no downsides. The best steel type stab moves are 80 base power, and so some of these are more niche usage. I find Gyro Ball pretty hard to use. It's basically just like Stack Attack and Ferrothorn, and you need to be like 4 times slower than the opponent in order to actually have it be better than the more reliable moves. But like on like Stack Attack specifically, it can make use of Heavy Slam, like on Celesteela specifically, but it's awkward. It's an awkward move pool that, like, even if you're mid-speed steel type, which most of them are, like Reggie still doesn't really want to use a Gyro Ball because it, like, the thing in front of it would have to be super fast for it to be really, really a good move. So Steel Roller only in terrain, very good in terrain, very impactful for shutting down terrain, but like, that's why steel types are more organized defensively. They're amazing defensive and they're awkward offensively. So the Mons, some of the best offensive steel types are the ones that have other types. They use that other type, and a good example coming up is Magna Zone. Magna Zone, it's a steel type, but it's really an electric type. It's an electric type first and foremost. Electric types have lots of different attacks, and their attacks are generally not resisted by much. We saw with the previous episode on circuitry, and so Magneton uses its very, very strong 130 special offense and the electric typing to do really, really good damage, but it has some issues. The steel type issues of being slow, and the steel type issues of having some clear weaknesses, right? So Magna Zone resists like 11, 12 types, like among the most resisting mons out there, but it's got the double ground weakness. And I've wondered to myself, why isn't Magna Zone top tier? Why isn't it a high tier? Because I don't consider Heatran's double ground weakness to be a debilitating problem. Like, yeah, you need to run a Shuka Berry some of the time, but the idea is you let them go first and you take the KOs. They're both double weak to ground steel types with good overall stats, in particular a very high special attack, but Heatran just has the better coverage in general. It's got the ground move, which is like the perfect complement to its offensive stabs, and Magna Zone doesn't really have other good stab moves. I don't know if I missed one or two, but it's basically just these three. It stabs and body press, and it's not as good at body pressing. I mean, it can iron defense body press, but unlike Corviknight, it does have some more severe weaknesses that can interrupt its goal of becoming an unbreakable wall. But it's got like the electric type mischief moves. It's got screens, it's got electric terrain, T-Wave, Magnet Rise, and just because it has weaknesses doesn't mean it doesn't also have immense resistances, and so Ally Switch becomes very, very good if you can see that rock move coming and you switch right in. So the problem the Magna Zone faces is often being outsped and having a couple of clear weaknesses, particularly the ground type. So I actually did some sample sets for Magna Zone. I think its ability, sturdy, very important, because if you got a clear weakness, at least you can live one of everything, even something that would totally blow you up. So this is a bulky Pokemon. This is a mon with good defensive stats, but it's bulky against most things, and for everything else, they're sturdy. So that's the idea, is that it can take a lot of hits with the Assault Vest. It's got just enough useful attacks that it can do a little speed control, a little bit of like, if you cut its special attack, then it can still do good damage with body press. So this is like good type synergy, but it's like good coverage, but it's kind of all it's got. Sturdy really helps because all of those berries that activate at low health, you can reliably get into them. So I think Mirror Coat's really good with Sturdy, right? It tanks any super strong special hit. Like, this is your way to OHKO with Circuitry. Like, it takes you down to 1 health. Actually, no, Magna Zone resists all of Circuitry attacks. This is a way to resist a Chandelure that would totally blow up Magna Zone, and then you OHKO it with Mirror Coat. So very, very good. And then Sturdy procs all those berries, so you'll get some more health to work with. Another good berry, like, that's another place for creativity, is using Sturdy with berries. So like Custap Berry, you're getting knocked down to 1 health, but then you will always go first next turn, so you'll definitely get your second shot in, which Magna Zone can make great use of with its great stats. I think a defensive Magna Zone can work when you don't see a lot of obvious ground coverage, when you've built a team in which You don't attract a lot of ground moves, don't have a lot of other ground weaknesses. I think it's very important for building a team with Magna Zone. But Iron Defense Body Press, super good. As long as Magna Zone doesn't get blown up by a ground move, really, then it is a legit tank. It can do electric type stuff, electric terrain, rising voltage, discharge. And it can, what's this? Oh, this is screwing around. This is the ally switch. Very, very good. Screens, electro web. You can make it at utility player. Most steel types can be slow-paced utility players. But I have trouble recommending Magna Zone unless you're really willing to make it work for you. Unless you're willing to limit other ground weaknesses, you're willing to give it lots of speed control so that it can sometimes go first. You're willing to give it a good trick room mode some of the time. It can be good in trick room. You can definitely get more than 10 points out of Magna Zone of value if you really do well, but given its weaknesses, I'm going to leave it at 10. So it's a pretty good steel type. Is draftable. Our last is this is definitely a more marginal steel type, right? For a high power level league like High Roller, you probably don't even want to mess around with mid tier and low tier steel types like Doughblade. Get it? Double Blade? Doughblade? Oh my god, this game. We just looked at a fucking jingling keys and called it a Pokemon. Like, this is an incredibly deep strategy game where I'm around like cute animals and then some really stupid designs. But we take it in stride. It's all in good fun. So this is a mon that doesn't have a lot of moves. I don't think I put all the usable ones here. It's not Prankster. These are not attacks. I didn't list all of them, but it's basically it. This is all it's got. It's got Gyro Ball. I just didn't finish this, and maybe I'll take a break and add more. But it's a mon that is extreme, and extreme is good. Extreme makes the game fun. Clear strengths, clear weaknesses. This mon is super ridiculously physically bulky, a 96th percentile, but it also has access to Eviolite. This is the pre-Evo of Aegislash, which is a legit top tier steel type. But sometimes you need to dig deep, right? These 10 steel types are going to be gone, and what's left if Corviknight, Klefki, and Magna Zone are all taken? You're going to sometimes need to dig deep, especially if you run out of money on a limited draft. Then you're going to need to find a mon that's really, really good against physical attacks, and then give it a light screen. Give it snarl support. Give it something that allows it to tank those special attacks, because it's really, really physically bulky. When you add that Eviolite, this is quite literally the most physically bulky Pokemon, period. Now, like, other mons could theoretically have an item that boosts their defense, like Grassy Seed, but let's assume that Doughblade is a mon without an item. It lives with its Eviolite. And considering that, it is the bulkiest mon on the physical side. But even with the Eviolite, it's not great on the special side. So it's a mon with clear weaknesses. And if Doughblade was a mon that you brought every week, it would really struggle, because I would bring strong fire, special fire type moves like Overheat every single time, and its ability is sometimes useful. All attacks that it goes for hit, and all attacks going against it also hit, but that also makes it exploitable, right? You can run Inferno, a strong special fire move that only hits half the time, always hits Doughblade, so I think it's a very exploitable Pokemon. You can hit it with Fire Blast, 85%, nope, 100% of the time. So very, very clearly has weaknesses, but if you can get in position where it is beating physical attackers against teams like Sand teams are like all physical attackers. They're like Dracozold, Hippowdon, Dracovish. It's living Choice Band, Strongjaw, Dracovish that's going first. It's completely insane physical bulk here. And so this is the physically bulkiest mon without Eviolite. Is Avalugg is taking a little bit more damage than Doughblade. So it is the physically bulkiest Pokemon in existence, which is kind of weird. And like the other Eviolite mons, the mons known for being very bulky, even bulkier than Porygon 2 on the physical side. P2 also has special bulk, so that's the one thing that Doughblade does not have. But yeah, we're hitting like one of the strongest super effective moves I can think of. you can bulk yourself out just a little bit and live just fine. It's the special hits where it starts to get kind of awkward. Like Rapidash is not a special attacker, but you can run a special attack just for Doughblade, and so that's the problem. Like Azolf's not even a fire type, but its Fire Blast can beat the Doughblade. So you're gonna need to run like max special bulk on this mod. You're gonna need to run it with Light Screen. With both of those things, you're actually living the strong hits. That's a Life Orb, Heatran, Flamethrower. That's pretty impressive, but you need to help Doughblade out. Otherwise, it's a sitting duck. It's not fast. This is wrong. Its speed is 50, right? Unless I'm crazy. Let's look. No, it's 35. I was right. But I've run a couple of sample sets, and I think these three are basically the best ways to run Doughblade. Is bulky attacker that tries to patch up its special defense issues, that uses Swords Dance to make itself a strong sweeper, but knowing that it's not going first unless you give it strong Trick Room support. Some of the time it's a sitting duck against a strong special move, so that priority move. This is the second strongest Shadow Sneak. This is the third strongest Shadow Sneak. I looked this up earlier, but its evolutionary parent, Aegislash, is the second strongest. So it's like one of the strongest Shadow Sneaks out there. And so with Swords Dance Shadow Sneak, you actually take some Okos. But it has a couple of really good stab moves. Iron Head's really good under Trick Room when you're going first. Sacred Sword, really good. Just like a general top tier attacking move because it ignores defense boosts on their side. So this is like a Trick Room sweeper or a setup sweeper that it can be a setup sweeper with Shadow Sneak in case it's about to go down. This is the way to say, I can't live the special fire hits, and so I'm a Focus Sash Mon. I try to go first. You might want to put a Shadow Sneak on here, or you give it's got a setup move here. I'm making it twice as fast. This 2 times this is what? 160, 174, so you're outspeeding like Mineshout, you're outspeeding Charizard after Autotomize. Kind of decent, and then you're not going to live that long if you're not investing in your bulk and your Doughblade, so you just run the Sash, you go fast, then you try to squeeze out as much power with a Close Combat or Iron Head. This can work, and I think you need that as part of your threat bubble. If Doughblade is always going slow, then I think it's too exploitable. And then the other Doughblade actually makes use of its no guard ability, so Screech only hits 85% of the time. It also has Metal Sound, same deal, but for amplifying your special damage. Wide Guard helps it. That's a pretty rare move. I think a fair amount of Steel types get it, but in general, Wide Guard is something you want on your draft league. But if you don't think about it, you won't have it. But it's a mon with a couple of good moves, a couple of surprisingly good moves like Sacred Sword and Shadow Sneak, a couple of utility moves, and a clear weakness. Multiple clear weaknesses. This mon is not only weak to all the things Steel types are weak, well, not fighting, it's immune to fighting, that's really good, but it's also weak to Ghost and Dark, and there's lots of Shadow Balls out there that you're going to want to have to try to live. It can live things like a Spectre Shadow Ball, you're just going to need to help it out. I think it needed extra Spadef, or a Light Screen. So this is a mon that I don't think you should take on a high power league like High Roller. On like a regular power league like with VBLS, it's maybe worth it on a team that's supporting it, but maybe, well, I wouldn't say it's better than no Steel type. That's kind of a tricky thing to decide. But it might not be worth its price if it's costed significantly more than 6. But in a low tier league, I think that's Doughblade's time. So if you cut off the first 200 mons, then it's Doughblade's time to shine. There's not a lot of Steel types that are in that kind of pricing or lower. So Doughblade will be very viable in the next season of VBL, in which we're going a lower tier. We're approaching the end. We're going to talk about how it all comes together, but one quick point on Dynamax. Dynamax made Steel types way more important offensively than they ever have been. I've only played competitive in Gen 8, but I'm a historian of the game, and I've talked to people who said that you never use Steel types for attacking, but all of a sudden every mon with Steel coverage became an attacker. Every Steel type became an attacker because Steel Spike was such a strong max move. It was good. Like, Steel types generally don't need the physical bulk. They're already physically bulky, and some of them have iron defense, but it really helps allies out. It really helps do damage while increasing your defense is just really good because it makes the Dynamax mons live all 3 turns of Dynamax, which is what you want. And so steel types switch into max moves with their unparalleled resistances. Dynamax is a game where a couple of key attacks usually decide the game, and so actually resisting those super strong attacks can really, really help. That awkward steel move pool no longer matters when you're steel spiking. And typically a lot of them have Earthquake or Stomping Tantrum or something, so they have access to improve their special defense, which would normally be their weakness. In general, steel types as attackers were better than they are now. I think you want to commit yourself to a defensive steel type that supports your team, or a couple of really, really good offensive steel types like the Kartanas out there. But Kartana's great because it's busted, because it has the highest physical attack stat in the whole game, not because it's a steel type. So I eventually go down. I have let's just preview it. Here's my steel type tier list. Some of the best mons outside the top 10. This is not how good they are. This is a how good they are when you consider their job is to be steel types. And so Kartana I put in the top tier, but I brought it right down when I consider it's great, but it's not great at being a steel type. It doesn't do the job because it dies to a Swift Breeze on the special side. Corviknight I think is approaching this pantheon of great steel types. Klefki's getting there, Magna Zone's getting there, but some mons like Lucario and Bishop I think are very good, but they don't resist Fairy. They don't have real bulk. These are more attacking oriented, so I think they're good. Like Lucario I'd pay 10 or 11 for just as much as Magna Zone, but it gets docked because it's not good at being steel type. It doesn't do what it's supposed to do on the defensive side. It just gives you a lot of different moves and more than you might expect on the offensive side. But for steel types are so good that you actually want to start dipping into pre-evolutions, like the Doughblade if you're really pressed. But Magneton is quite good. Do we have any other pre-evos up here? I can't see any, but a mon that looks mediocre that has a steel type is still draftable. This is about the edge of where I would say, you probably don't want a Lowland Landslash unless you're going Hail mode, and you probably don't want Hail mode. Maybe I'm biased, I think it's generally garbage, but it can be good. You just really need to build in ways that complement it. These are this is just for low tier, D tier, Bronzor definitely has a use, Trick Room Ally Switch, and its bulk is real. This is a baby mon, but with Eviolite, it's for real on the bulk. It's just sitting there for the most part. You need to run Hypnosis. You need to be morally willing to run Hypnosis to make this a good Pokemon. So even some of these baby mons, I think, have some use, especially in lower power level leagues. But what do you draft with steel types? Oh, well, fairy types, because fairies are weak to poison and steel resists both of them. You draft out fairies because it's the other best type in the game and you usually want one. But water type, you want water types because it's one of the other best types in the game, but it really has good defensive synergy. It beats the fire types that would be beating your steel type. Dragon, really good. Dragons, we could talk about dragons for a while, but they were really, really good, but stopped by fairies and other dragons that were faster than them. And so steel good. Steel is one of the only types that's good against dragons, one of the only types that's good against fairies. And so your steel type pairing helps your dragon beat other dragons because it beats the dragon types for you. And there's also Dragmag, a historically good strategy in singles where you trap the steel types in with mons that can do that, and then you beat the steel type because without a couple of key resistances, dragons just go burr. So really, really good pairing with dragons. They usually don't have special bulk, so give them more special bulk. Setup sweepers, right? If you've got time, what are you going to do with it, right? You don't want to just slow the game down and then just chunk away 20% of the time, right? If they've got recovery, then you're not really doing anything. So you want setup. You want to use that time to your advantage. And then the Stabmons. What was I going for with that one? I think since steel is not a very good offensive type, particularly without Dynamax anymore, you're going to want mons that just smack things with their type. You're going to want offensive mons because steel types aren't that in general. The Galarian Zapdos will be your breaker, while the steel type does mischief, does screens, does ally switch, does live hits and do speed control, live hits and then finish off the thing that Gyapdos has left at 20%. So that's how you work with steel types. Worst case, oh no, I've lost the steel race and there's only like Pawniard and Bronzor and a Lowland Dug trio left, and I just don't want them. They don't do anything for me. Well, there's ways to get around not having a steel type. There are some other great defensive typings out there. I think fire is one of them. It's one of the only other types that beats fairies, so if you're not beating fairies with your steel type, then you're going to want a fire type. Also beats steel types, which steel doesn't beat other steel, but it at least resists, and so another thing that beats steels would be good. Steels are usually providing that physical bulk for you, but without it, Intimidate will do some of that. Steels allow you to just sit on the field and not worry, right? Because not a lot of things will beat you quickly. But without that protection, Mons are going to want other protection. Redirection is one of the best protection. Keep a Pokemon around 1 turn or 2 longer. Other broken Mons, like there's not a lot of Mons that are going to do defensively what Steel types do for you, but Rotom forms really help. Other broken types like Water Ground, Pure Normal, Pure Fairy, just doesn't have a lot of weaknesses. And Steel types give you the advantage of playing without your stress levels rising. Yes, sometimes they get O-code, but they get O-code less than everything else for the most part. And a Pure Fairy type, a bulky Fairy like an Aromatisse, or there aren't a lot of good ones. Clefable. Clefable is really, really good at protecting a Pokemon, but I wanted to avoid, I guess, talking about redirectors specifically. But if you decide, I'm not going to get a steel type, and I'm not going to get a lot of defensive tools, there is an option to go hyper offense. I don't think all 11 of your slots should be devoted for, Tailwind and 10 strong attackers. It kind of works. Just don't play defense. It can work as a game plan for many weeks. I think it's, if you don't respect it a lot, you probably should. But you still want a little bit of defensive backbone in every single draft squad, and steel is the best way to get yourself started with that. So, steel types, are they draftable? Yes. Are mediocre steel types draftable? Also yes. But you want to get these steel types top 3 rounds, usually. Like, unless they're obviously overpriced. Like, Registeel, hate them on. Super stally and gross. But, like, it does so much for you. Like, it protects, it wins endgames like its job. It provides a lot of pressure on team building, forces them to bring particular things which you can take advantage of. Aegislash has become top tier in the non-Dynamax era with its type shifting or its form changing. Quality Mons, when they accidentally make a legendary and then give it a steel type, what are they doing? I mean, obviously the Pokemon Company is balancing around other things besides competitive VGC, but like, it really these Mons win draft leagues. Like, I've seen these Mons win multiple draft leagues at this point. Just take my word for it, right? Draft these guys in the top 1 round. Heatran doesn't need a lot of support to be the top tier, but it can be. That's my verdict. Steel types, draft them quickly, draft them faster than you would expect, because they will run out. Get them while you can. I don't feel like doing other takes. You're getting a weird edited ending. Goodbye.